I hope you're all enjoying your evening or morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. But it's a special Monday live stream because I wasn't able to do the follow up or second live stream on Sunday the way I had initially planned. But it's no big deal, right? Bump it back one day. So apologize if, hey, Dada, if you were planning on being a part of that yesterday, but can't today, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Enjoy the video whenever you have time. But we'll give everybody a few minutes in case you're live and available to join us if you'd like. And then give a few updates and we'll get started with the Bible and the Trinity in Conflict, part 25. God is one person, not three. And excuse me, we talked a little bit about this in the very first episode of this series on Galatians 3:20. We'll come back to it briefly tonight, but we really just focused on that text primarily in that video to set the stage, to establish that the God of the Bible is one person, not three. And Galatians 3:20 and many other texts explicitly teach that. Of course, we're very familiar with other texts like 1 Corinthians 8:6 that tell us basically how many persons and who that person is, God, how many persons that the God of the Bible is. But there are many, many others that also make that clear. And I'm going to show you also where in the Bible, if something like the Trinity were what God is, there's a very easy way that could have been communicated based on what I'm going to show you. and I know we've probably talked about a few other ways that in discussing other texts, like I said, 1 Corinthians 8:6, but I think I have another way that we can address this issue. Good to see you, TKS, Everett Commodore, and of course, Betsy. Thank you all for sharing your evening with me. I know it's often busy, but I'm trying to get in as much as I can before I get really busy. And so, it sometimes, like I said, maybe this weekend, I might not even this coming weekend. I'm planning on doing CW job discussion on number 5, but like I said, sometimes things happen, and if I get super busy, it can back me up in ways where I might have to skip a weekend or a show. So sometimes when I have more time, I'll try to fill that with more live streams if possible, or opportunities for us to share time together. So we'll just maybe another minute or two, and then we'll get started. I got some good stuff. We'll do some Bible reading, right? We'll talk a little bit about this Trinity, and as we know, we've talked about the Trinity in many other videos, and we have a location now where anyone who burdens you, or who antagonizes you, or who blasphemes you in association with you know who, you just send them right over to the Collapsagon, okay? We want them to put down any concerns or arguments they may have, they feel we have not addressed. And if we have, we'll show them where we have. And if we haven't, we'll be happy to accommodate them, right? Just move them into the Collapsagon and continue to build up the monument to false doctrine, specifically to the heresies of Sam Shamoon. And of course, that's it's more like entertainment. Not everyone, this is a little bit more, we'll say professional video show, right? Although the initial episodes were invaded by Sam and his followers. And of course we had to call them out. We have to deal with them. We know we know who we're dealing with. We have a special group of individuals who are even rejects in their own circle of believers, but for entertainment purposes mostly, and also to spare people from having to go through the insanity, right, of constantly dealing with the same issues. Collapsagon, boom, right there. And of course, we'll still do videos and things, and then just we'll use those to continue to supplement the Hall of Shame and build it up so that future generations will see we were dealing with nuts and the kind of arguments that they were presenting, and how often and how many times we had to tell them the same things, right? So, the Trinity is important because, especially in Christian discussions, it's one of the more popular beliefs because of its association with Constantine and political groups throughout the ages or centuries, I should say. But up until that time, Christianity was very different. And of course, I realized it started to take on, or individuals in it began to promote things that eventually led to the very type of merger that you see with Constantine and Trinitarians. So, and a lot of things changed there. Like I said, we're going to get into the whole idolatry issue. Constantine we're going to start with him. He really, when he brought his political weight to the Trinitarians and convinced them of his false dream and told them about the idol and victory, and then was good with Trinity. Hey, why not? Let's make this guy a 20, 30-foot idol. Let's give him a good arch, put all his false gods on there, whatever. So, I'm not saying everybody was down with everything Constantine did in terms of the Trinitarians and stuff, but either way, that's where, in coming together and bringing the Trinity really to its formula, its basic formula, although things continue to develop with the natures of Christ and stuff, Holy Spirit, but we got the homoousios right, and we will get into the creeds and councils probably. I don't know. Maybe I still have so many biblical texts though, but it's possible maybe we can. But I'm still doing the early Christian writers series. So let's move a little further along there. Let's get closer to the 3rd and 4th centuries, and then we can probably transition at some point right from that series into the councils and creeds involving Constantine, of course, and the Trinitarians and others. That's probably the best way to go. So I'll do some of these shows where they're more subject oriented, like tonight, and not like text oriented. Although we do text, but some are like text specific, And so, whereas this is more like the concept of the Trinity, or the concept of God taught in the Bible. As we know, Trinitarians teach that there are 3 persons who share the essence of God eternally. They're not 3 gods. They're not 3 individual beings. They're not 3 separate spirits. They're 3, what eventually became a hypostasis. But, I'm not going to get into that right now because there's a whole controversy around the development of that word. But basically, they believe that there can be 3 distinct individuals sharing one essence of being without separating that essence into 3 gods. So they're all the same God by sharing the same essence, but they're 3 distinct persons: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So God in the Trinity is 3 persons. That's who the one God is. It's the Trinity, right? There's one God. How often do we argue with these guys, right? And they're like, look, how many gods do you believe in? Are you a polytheist? Right? It says no gods but me. Okay, fine. We already explained all that to you, but okay, let's talk about you. How many God? There's one God, you're saying? That's what you believe? You're arguing with us because you believe there's one God, right? That's the Trinity, right? Yes. Okay. Well, in the Bible, the one God is the Father and never anyone else unless they're acting as the Father. And they even tell us that, like Jesus explicitly does. What I'm saying isn't me, it's the Father, right? It's like you're looking at me, but it's the Father. How many times do I have to tell you this, right? Same with the examples of angels throughout the Old Testament, the way they talk, who they're talking for. That's how the sons of God are in relation to their Father when they're worshiping and serving Him, not rebelling. Right? So we have one God the Father, and we have only individual personal references when it comes to God. And I'll get into it more as we start. So we should probably just go ahead and do that. Um, yeah. Okay, who do we have here? I want to make sure. Okay, Bankhead, and I'll be checking emails and stuff. Oh, good. Looks like you're just getting here, Bankhead. I'll be checking emails tomorrow. It was a crazy day today, and we'll see what we can work out, Bankhead. Hopefully, we can meet up. I'm not in Los Angeles, county or city, but I'm right outside that in Southern California. Everything's kind of within an hour, hour and a half. At least that's how we think of it. So good to see everybody. All right, let's go ahead and get yeah, the Collapsagon. Well, they deserve that, right? I mean, that's these people are not really. We're not. Hopefully, everyone can tell. I mean, we're addressing them, but we're not taking them seriously. Right? If that's not your cup of tea, if you don't like kind of having a semi lower level discussion with apologetic nuts, then just don't worry about that stuff, right? But again, not everybody does the same type of ministry. That's kind of what we tell the Watchtower, right? A lot of times when I was in the Watchtower, they didn't like I talk a lot about the Trinity, but they let me do it. But you could tell they didn't really want me to spend that much time with the Trinitarians in that. A lot of people did. So not everybody is really interested in the same level of discussion about things like the Trinity. A lot of people may think we're just all nuts, because we talk about this so much. But that's because those people don't get engaged in discussions with Trinitarians and apologists and others as often as we do. And that's their choice, right? They don't have to do that. Nobody has to talk about anything they don't want to. But I regularly say, look, it's not good to debate people regularly. We should do all things apart from argument, but we also know we're to overturn the deep things of Satan, make a defense, shut the mouths. We have to make the call individually on what we're going to do and then answer for it. That's the whole point of being a Christian witness of Jah, right? And we want to help each other, but at the end of the day, we all have to decide, okay, you're going to go that way, I'm going to go this way. We'll all praise Jah. Right? Did Paul and Barnabas all get along? No, we already know this didn't happen. They kept going. So we don't all agree on every subject we discuss. Well, we already know that, right? We'll keep going. Go praise Jah the Father then. Go promote Jesus as the pre-Christian biblical Messiah. Go live the golden rule and help the poor and the needy and everybody else that you can, without being taken advantage of yourself, of course. All right. Oh, one more thing. So in addition, right, we have the Collapsagon, the whole thing going there. So we've moved them over, right? And I think I still have more, of course. In fact, I was just gonna say, if with regard to Sam, I came across a video of Dr. White addressing Sam, and that's we've been talking a lot about this all things, right? Every creation, all things, nothing in heaven on earth, and right from Revelation 5, 3 through 13. to other texts like I gave in my video on Saturday about comments review number 5 and comments on the refutation of all of Sam Shamu's heresies video. And then also, what was the other video? Was another one. But I was going to say, so we've got all that stuff, right? Oh, yeah, it was the John 5:23 and Revelation 5:13 and 14, honor and worship, why Trinitarians fail video. And then after that was the comments number 5 that kind of touched on some of the same things in addition to the Collapsagon. So we've kind of been dealing with some of those lower level things, right? That the more pathetic aspects of what we kind of have to do or choose to do at times. But there's some value. There's nothing wrong with engaging some people if they're going to continue to burden us and drive everybody else nuts. And we know they do, right? They regularly burden other people and repeat the same questions and stuff. So it does help, I think, people, and this is a monument that we can just share. Hey, go over here, either check it there or put it down. We can deal with these people, no problem, everyone. They're basically a joke, right? They're just false teachers and liars, or perhaps misled and sincerely believe, and they just need more assistance. So that's what all that's kind of been about. And of course, documenting Sam's hypocrisy, right? Completely insulting fellow believers for things he had to go through. And then, of course, the whole possession element. And this ties in with the new thing I'm going to deal with. I have a video of Dr. White talking about Colossians 1:20 and Sam Shamoun's belief that tapanta in Colossians 1:20, because that's another one, right? I didn't even really bring that up. I referenced it because I referenced my video, part 17 of this series, and in my live discussion about that was the upload, right? On the comments review number 5. I talked about the whole issues involved with the text that we were discussing from the comments, right? And that were also a subject that I did a separate video on. And then I came across a video that made me think more about another text that, again, I only referenced in that part 17 reference of Colossians 1:15 through 20. I didn't think of bringing up Colossians 1:20 more in greater discussion in either of those videos, where this whole Revelation 5:13 through 14, all creation, all things came up again. I kind of focused on Colossians 1:18 and then the recurrence of the all-inclusive formula with an exception in Revelation 5:3, right? Which the tripersonal manifestation of Sam totally ignored, right? Which is what they do, right? It's the kind of games they play, and they try to trick you into stuff. Or the same thing on John 5:20, right? He didn't even reference John 5:22, which shows there's a total difference. It's similar. And then he mistranslates it as the same, even though there's evidence that it means similar, based on the fact that he's given something the Father already had. So it has to be similar. Can't be the same. But he wanted it to be so badly. Right? He ignored the context. It was same anyway. Either way, Colossians 1:20. Apparently Sam Shamoun believes that Satan will be reconciled. Will be basically, reconciled to God through Christ. So while we already know that there's not a lot we can do for Sam and people like him, we want to try, but we know we're really just hoping we can lessen the damage that they do. So Sam is not only displaying signs of active possession, but he's now going to bat for Satan because he's so, and this is what I'm going to talk about in this video, this is coming this week. Dr. White, well, Dr. White doesn't at least go that far, right? He's not as insane as Sam, of course, in that way. But you can tell that even Dr. White is having a difficulty with Colossians 1:20 because he can't stop thinking of tapanta as everything, totally, because that's essential to his argument in Colossians 1:5 through Colossians 1:16 through 17. They argued all the way for that meaning and for tapanta there. Totally collapse on verse 18. And then in verse 20, they're so far gone. This is what I meant by Sam is kind of like a victim, like he's been damaged by their false doctrine. I mean, he's totally responsible for what he's done, but there's been some damage, I believe, right now. So with Sam now thinking that Satan can be reconciled to God because of Colossians 1:20, that's because of the damage they inflicted on him with their view of tapanta with the Trinity. They drove him so insane with forcing their doctrine into his mind about it being everything, and so Jesus is a creator and he can't be a created thing, even though it just called him that in verse 15. Incredible, right? It's like Revelation 5:3. Oh, so the Lamb can't be something that's living in heaven. That's what it says. Nothing in heaven, nothing on earth. Doesn't say even creature. And then it says the Lamb. That's almost exactly like what we're talking about in Colossians 1. And so is verse 18 and verse 20. Like I'm going to show when I review Dr. White's commentary on Sam. Because I believe they could both save themselves a lot of trouble and false doctrine if they just recognized what tapanta means, right? It's context specific, and it does not mean every single possible thing. In fact, it regularly, if not always, has an exception. I mean, we reviewed numerous examples in my comments review number 5 on Sam Shimon's heresies video. I did the same thing in my part 17 to this series, which I'm going to clip separately. And then I'm going to do the video, like I said, and I'm going to comment on Dr. White's commentary on Sam and Sam's attempt to reconcile Satan to God. And this could be a cry for help, right? This could be Sam's way of trying to get salvation, even though he's possessed, right? In my opinion, right? In my opinion, and the evidence that we've reviewed. Playing on my channel right now, or in the video list, we'll have a playlist up on Sam soon. Sam and apologetic insanity, something like that, right? Something befitting, maybe not insanity. I don't know. Maybe Sam will have to have his own playlist. He doesn't quite fit in any normal category. He's basically an apologetic nut, but he's kind of like, see, this is this thing we're talking about. I could have an all-inclusive statement about all the apologetic nuts, and Sam could be an understood exception because he's in a category all on his own. Right? So either way, I've got some good stuff. Let's get going. Right? But it's good, a little comedy with Sam. We have to enjoy him that way because remember, he's not as hateful and vile and mean and blasphemous as he is, and he has to answer for all that because he's not physically retarded, but he's spiritually that. And so let's just do what we got to do. We'll document all the heresies and false doctrine, and we move on, right? You can tell I'm confident. In fact, as I said the other day, I say we promote Sam and all the Shimonian cultists and liars as like the main representatives of the Trinity. The Protestants already did that. Catholics seem to be playing with fire right there. Why not, right? Why not? Let's just move him up there, and then that way everyone can see that it'll help them, hopefully. And of course we know there are a lot of people who believe in the Trinity sincerely, and we don't want them to lose their faith. But, we're not here to cater to anyone either, just so you don't feel bad about false doctrine. The same goes for the Watchtower or anybody else, or for us, right? we have to be sensitive, and I don't want people to totally, it can be a fine line. But if you're here watching the videos, then you've probably already crossed that line and you want more anyway. So why not? Let's just go and talk about it, and hopefully you will benefit in the long run. And if nothing else, you will have reasons for belief that aren't tied to someone who's requiring you to trust them 100% or believe in their traditions handed down from a pagan emperor. We'll talk about him another time. All right, so I'm gonna start with that. I'll show you guys real quick. Okay, I want to show that. You'll see why. Okay. Let me go ahead and do an official intro. I may leave it, what I said and just keep it all, but if I don't, then I can cut it here. So here we go, everyone. Bible and Training Conflict Part 25. I got some pretty cool stuff I don't think you've thought of, maybe, the way we're going to talk about tonight. Welcome to the Bible and the Trinity in Conflict, Part 25. God is one person, not three, as is taught in the Trinity. If you saw the thumbnail to this video, or if you look at it, it might not seem like something that is difficult to believe in. In fact, let's go ahead and bring it up, along with one other image to compare it with. If you look at the one on the bottom, you can see that's the thumbnail to this video, and it has a picture of Jesus and God the Father and a dove with the Spirit radiating for the Holy Spirit. Then above that, you have another picture, well-known picture by a Roman Catholic, that has three faces, basically, right, in one. Now, one other way you could draw that, and I think basically mean the same thing and be more realistic, the one on the top, would be if you had three heads, like a Siamese twin, but with a third head. That would be three people or persons, three separate individuals who are identifiable by their thought processes, sharing one nature or essence of being, one human body. That's as close of an analogy as I can think of for the Trinity. It is metaphysical, but Trinitarians are the ones telling us we have to believe it, right? They're the ones defining it from trying to use the Bible, and then, of course, primarily outside of it. So we have to be able to talk about it and discuss it and see if what they're telling us fits with what the Bible presents. They say there are three persons. Again, if you look at the one on the bottom, that one looks more normal, right? The one on the top doesn't really look normal in terms of human existence. A Siamese twin or a three-headed person would be more normal, I would say. We don't see people with four eyes in this case, right? And three noses and three mouths on one head. But what if I told you that the one on the top is actually more correct? Like I said with my Siamese or Trimese three-headed person model or example. Trinitarians believe there are three separate persons, identifiable individuals who are not separate from each other by nature or essence of being. When you look at the one on the bottom, to me it shows three separate beings, right? The Son, the Father, and the Holy Spirit. Now, maybe the Trinitarians who would use this picture would still see it as sort of the radiance that is shown as basically the Godhead or divine nature, and the figures you see are just the identifiable persons represented. But that has to be explained, right? The one on the top, everybody's going to know, okay, if there's three noses, three mouths, and three persons. Again, I don't think the one on the top is necessarily the best. I would use a three-headed, three separate heads, because I don't know that really is realistic. Whereas I think having three heads would be more realistic. And so, but they're close enough, and that picture's famous, so I wanted to use it to show the difference between the one on the bottom. Now, even though I believe the one on the top is more accurate, and the three-headed person, in an analogous sense of three persons and one being or essence of being, one nature, not three separate gods or three separate human beings in the analogous sense. I didn't use the one on the top because I just didn't think it, even though it's correct, I didn't think it would make Trinitarians think of it respectfully, right? It still doesn't, as I said, look normal. I couldn't really find a three-headed person. Siamese twin, that's pretty easy. But again, this one fits enough. It's basically giving me the same. If we see three persons behind those three noses and mouths and one nature, it's the same as a three-headed person for the purpose of this discussion. But I wanted to use the one on the bottom because I just thought, well, that looks better for the Trinity. See, I think of you Trinitarians. I'm considerate. Or at least I try to be. But I nonetheless believe the one on the top is more accurate in terms of the discussion. It's not, exactly perfect, but again, we don't have anything. We don't have a metaphysical experience with God in a way described in the Bible or individually that would allow us to know more than this, really, right? If the Bible is teaching the Trinity, three persons in one God, three identifiable individuals, but who share the same essence of being, they're not separate spirits, they're not separate gods, then it's very important that you have a visual understanding of how this relates to the doctrine of the Trinity. And we're going to get into it a lot more. I've done several videos already, and especially if you have not read my Jehovah's Witnesses Defended 2nd and 3rd edition. You can get them easily on ElihuBooks.com or on Amazon.com, digital or hardback on the 3rd edition. You need to read that second chapter, Understanding Trinitarianism. I will eventually make it into its own book with a lot more material, but it's just fine for now, and it will show you more of what I'm talking about when it comes to the Trinitarian understanding of person. And as we get closer in this series to our discussion of the councils and creeds involving the Trinity, we will also talk about the issue or technicalities involved with the Trinitarian belief in person. But just understand, for now, that when a Trinitarian says they believe God is three persons, they mean something closer to the top image. And whether that's completely accurate in their view or not, it at least should tell you that they believe there's one God, one, in the case of the analogy with the top image, one human being. But there are three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Three separate, identifiable individuals, but who are not separated in their nature or essence. You see now why I'm using that top picture? You need to understand they'll speak of the three as distinct from each other, but they do not believe They are separate from each other in their nature. They're distinct in their identities. But they're co-equal, co-eternal, all of it. When Jesus came to the earth, he took on a human nature. He did not give up his divine nature. You know how we as Christian witnesses of Jehovah's Witnesses or non-Trinitarians otherwise don't see Philippians 2 as Jesus continuing to be a God or divine on earth, but just a man, the last Adam. They see that as, they don't see it that way. I did a whole video on it in this series, so go ahead and take a look at it. I've written about it in my books and my Watching the Ministry blog articles, both linked, all linked below. So if you want more information, it's available to you. But I want you to kind of have an understanding as we get into these texts of why the question of how many persons God is important. If you talk to a Trinitarian and you don't understand that they have this tri-personal view of God, there's one God. Now they'll call each person God, but they're using God in a different way than when they mean one God, the Trinity. When they say that each one of the persons is God, they mean that person has the full nature of God. And so, while they're a separate person, they're still sharing the same nature as the other persons. So again, it's not divided. God to them is three persons. The one God is three persons. They'll call each of the persons God, by which they mean one who has the divine nature, the Godhead. They're not calling any of the persons a God individually or God as the Trinity. Hey, GL, thank you very much. I appreciate the super chat. Let's just see here. We got a good group tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's very important you understand it. I know it gets a little strange, especially when you read the Bible, right? But if you don't recognize that, then you can get into a discussion with the Trinitarian about issues, and before you know it, you're talking about something you wouldn't even be talking about if you just understood some of the terms better. So what we need to do when we ask, is the Bible in conflict with the Trinity on the question of how many persons God is? If the God of the Bible is three persons, we should be able to find something in the Old and New Testaments that indicates God is a plurality of persons. So what we're going to do tonight is take a look at several texts to see what the Bible says about the person or persons of God. And I'm going to start out with a text you might not expect. It's a text that I believe shows very clearly exactly how the Bible could easily have presented God as a Trinity. Are you ready? Let's go. Let me go ahead and bring up my selection of texts. We may go to the Bible Hub to check some of the original language text, but I don't think we'll need to necessarily tonight. I've provided some information, and the rest is not really controversial. But you're free to bring any question up related to the material, and we'll try to address it. So, how could the Bible have presented God as a Trinity? Well, I've done 2 other videos in a series that's ongoing as well on the use of Hebrew plurals in the Bible, which Trinitarians sometimes point to and say, well, these terms here are used in the plural. the term for God, for example, Elohim, or even there is a term in the Hebrew Bible for person, paneh, that we'll get to. We're going to be reviewing quite a bit, actually. And other terms that indicate a person, but that are pluralized in their form for reasons other than number. Right? You've probably heard of a plural of majesty or a plural of emphasis or greatness. I talk about those and read from Hebrew sources in those two videos, and I have more I'm going to present. The Greek Septuagint Bible never translates those types of plurals as a plural. And even all, I believe, certainly most, but I couldn't find one. All translations of the Bible that I found in English, none of them use the plural in those texts. Right? See, Trinitarians, when it comes to the plural for God, Elohim, well, that would just mean gods. But Trinitarians somehow come away with that and think, well, that plural is consistent with the Trinity. Well, how so? If it's a plural in number, right, this is what they want. They want a plural in number, but they want the persons in plural number. The word for person isn't in plural when they use Elohim. It's God. And that's because it's a plural of majesty, as is almost always shown by the context in modifying terms. And then the translation by the Greek, the Jews who understood the text they were translating and didn't use an actual plural. It could have been done very easily, but that would just contradict the Trinity, as I talk about in those videos, right? It would just mean gods. So that's like their worst example and contradicts their own understanding when they want it pluralized. But they just read their doctrine into it and they see that they see the plural of the word for God as the plural for the word for person. But again, there are numerous examples all throughout the Hebrew Bible of majestic plurals and other non-numerical plurals. I talk about many of them in those two initial videos of that series, so please take a look at them. I'll link them below as well. But you can just find them by scrolling through my video list. So outside of that usage, outside of the plural of majesty or the majestic plural or the similar types of emphasis non-numerical plurals, there is no example of an actual plural for person. There's some terms in the Hebrew and Greek Bible, Old and New Testament for Greek, that can mean your person, right? Like your whole individual person, or your face. Very often the term for face, what's your surface, your visible surface. Pane, or in Greek, prosopon, are two of the most common terms used, other than pronouns and certain other ways where individuality are expressed. But it's usually with pane and prosopon. Prosopon is never used to translate pane as a plural in reference to the faces or persons of God. So to me, that's a very easy way that it could have easily been done, especially when you read our first text. Take a look. Ezekiel 41, 17 through 19. So we'll move this one here. We'll do the earlier one first. Ezekiel 10:14. And each one had 4 faces. Let me just go ahead and bring that up because we will take a look at the original of this Ezekiel text. Sorry. We could go to the Bible Hub. In fact, Well, let me bring it up this one, and if we end up checking multiple, then I'll just bring up the Bible Hub. And actually, as we get into a few of the later ones, I am going to show multiple translations. So I'll just check my handy text right here for now, just to make sure that we can stay current with this. Ezekiel 10:14. Each one had 4 faces. In the Hebrew text, 10:14. It says 4 faces. It uses the Hebrew word, paneh. 4 faces for each one, echad. 4 faces to the one. Now, in Deuteronomy 6:4, we'll read in a moment, it says, Yahuwah Eloheinu, Yahuwah Echad. Jahuwah or Jah or God, Jahuwah or Ja'ol is one. Echad. Here, in fact, actually, let me go ahead and I'll bring up the Bible Hub so we can have it there. Might be better for some of these to read them together. They're so good and important. I told you I had some really good stuff. I try to bring up things I think will be helpful to everybody, right? And something a little bit new if possible. So check this out. So here's Ezekiel. I'll bring it up for you guys here. Here's Ezekiel 10:14. And you can see right here. Let me see if I can make that a little bigger. That's good. You got the Hebrew and then you have the English right here. You can always check it yourself. It says, and 4 faces had, and then in brackets, each one. Le echad. To each one. 4 faces, panim, the plural for faces, to each one. Echad. Same term as Jahuwah Echad. Ja'ol Echad. So here we have a spiritual being with 4 faces. Panim. The individual spirit is an echad, just like God in Deuteronomy 6:4. God is one, echad, just like this spirit being is one, echad. But this spirit being has 4 faces. One spirit being, 4 faces. The first, the face of a cherub. Face of the second of a man. Third, face of a lion. Fourth, the face of an eagle. Let's go back to the reading. Matches the NWT, as you can see right here. 4 faces, 2 of which are like image of God faces. Cherub and the man. You're never going to see this used for God. And yet, this is exactly what Trinitarians are telling us is true about him. That there's one essence of being, one echad, and more than one person. I don't think the man is the same as the cherub. And so if the Bible wanted to present one echad with multiple persons, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, why would that be so hard when you have right here one echad and multiple faces or persons, certainly two in the intelligent image of God sense, sharing the same essence of being? But we don't have that. That's not what you're going to find anywhere in the Bible when it comes to God. But you do find it right here, and you also have echad. You just don't have the multiple faces or persons the way you have here in Deuteronomy 6:4 or anywhere else. God is described as pane, prosopon. It goes on to describe the faces more. We'll talk about this series of texts here. In the carvings that were made in the Old Testament representing the cherubs and that, when we get into the idolatry series that will be starting soon, beginning with Constantine and then the Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox and, of course, the Protestants. But we'll get into these texts to show that the difference is, of course, obvious, as I've explained before. Here, God is commanding people to do those things, just like when he commanded people to make the carvings on the Ark of the Covenant. God did not command you to make an idol of Mary or a statue of Mary that you use as an idol because it's part of your religion where you revere her as part of your worship to God, if not her. God did not command you to make a painting of Jesus. God did not command you to wear a cross around your neck or place them all around your house of worship. God commanded these people to do this. So unless you've been commanded to make your idols, please stop misusing the Bible for your own purposes and failing to take John's warning to heart. Guard yourselves from idols, my little children. Last verse of 1 John, Ezekiel 15, 6 and 7. Therefore, this is what, look at this, right? We're in Ezekiel. Remember in Ezekiel 10:4, echad, one of the living creatures, multiple faces, multiple persons. But then when we get to God in Ezekiel, therefore this is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah has said, just like the vine tree among the trees of the forest, I've given the fire as fuel, so I've given the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and I've set my face against them. And they will have to know that I am Jehovah when I direct my face against them. We just go to Ezekiel 15:17. Oh, where'd that go? 15:7, I'm sorry. 15:7. You can see right here. And I will set my face, if you look across to the Hebrew term, pane. My face. Ezekiel 15. Let's check Septuagint. Sorry. Yes, prosopon. In fact, I'll show that to you here. So you have this singular, pane, in Hebrew. And then in the Greek, Ezekiel 15:7. Here's prosopon right here. Okay? So we have a clear difference, do we not? Up here in Ezekiel 10:4, we get the plural panim in the Hebrew. In Ezekiel 10:4 in the Greek, is that 10:4? Sometimes the numbering's different, but my program lines it up. Let's see. No, that is different. So it's 10:14. Sorry. Okay, it is a little different. It doesn't look, there is no verse 14. So you can see right there. Let me pull up my printed edition and just verify real quickly in Rolf's. My computer edition doesn't have all the notes necessarily, so we want to make sure. You can see right there, those see right here where my cursor is, right, this empty space. There's no text for 14. Just like in my Rolf's edition on my screen. Just to verify, though, in the printed edition of Rolf's, Ezekiel 10:14. I want to see if it has the plural for prosopon. Okay, so it's not in the main text. Let's see. Well, it's definitely not showing me any reading that would be corresponding to the Hebrew text, just like you're seeing here. It's a vacant verse in the Septuagint, and I haven't gotten to it in my translation, so I can't give you all the details. But in the Hebrew text, it is a singular, pane. I'm sorry, in Ezekiel 10:14, it's the plural, panim. But in Ezekiel 15:7, it's the singular, pane, both in the Hebrew and the Greek. We just don't have 10:14 in the Greek. Let me just verify, double check. Yeah. One more thing. Yeah. Okay. That's fine. So it's still, again, it's the singular for God in the Hebrew and the plural for the living creature in Ezekiel. And the living creature is one, echad, with multiple faces, panim, two of which are made in God's image, cherubim and man. So there doesn't seem to me to be any reason why God, who's also called echad in Deuteronomy 6:4, couldn't have been presented with panim, more than one face or identifiable feature that indicates plurality of persons. If one of the living creatures is described that way, then of course he could have been. If that's his essential nature, why wouldn't he have been presented that way so we don't have this problem? And everything else contradicts it, as we're going to see, even this right here, Ezekiel 15:7, the singular for face, not plural, like we have in Ezekiel 10:14 for echad. Now let's see again throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament, how person or face is used for God. We know how it can be used. We just saw how it could be used when, again, one of the living creatures, a spirit being, echad, had more than one pene, more than one intelligent image of God pene, that are clearly two distinct persons. So Exodus 33:14. So he said, my own person, this is God talking, Jehovah, pene, my own person, pene, will go along and I shall certainly give you rest. Verse 15, at this he said to him, if your own person, pene, is not going along, do not lead us up from here. Verse 16, and by what now will it be known that I have found favor in your eyes, I and your people? Is it not by your going along with us, in that I and your people have been made distinct from all the other people who are on the surface of the ground? Verse 17, and Jehovah went on to say to Moses, this thing too of which you have spoken, I shall do, because you have found favor in my eyes, and I know you by name. At this he said, cause me to see, please, your glory. Verse 19, but he said, I myself shall cause my goodness to pass before your face. And God, in speaking to Moses, uses pene, singular. And I will declare the name of Jehovah before you, and I will favor the one whom I favor, and I will show mercy to the one whom I may show mercy. Verse 20, and he added, you are not able to see my face, pane, prosopon. Because no man may see me and yet live. Verse 21, and Jehovah said further, here is a place with me. You must station yourself upon the rock. Verse 22, and it has to occur that while my glory is passing by, I must place you in a hole in the rock, and I must put my palm over you as a screen until I have passed by. After that, I must take my palm away, and you will indeed see my back. But my face, pane, prosopon, may not be seen. It's all singular, everybody. Hebrew and Greek. And we have a lot more to go in terms of text examples, but there is no plural example that's an actual plural. The only non-numerical plurals that exist where it concerns pane, I discuss in my Hebrew plurals video, showing that they're not translated by the plural, and they're not even translated by the plural by any translation, because everybody knows they're not numerical plurals, whether it's Elohim in the text that come up, or person. When it's a literal plural, a numerical plural, then it is made clear in the translation, the context, or the words used by the other translations. So here, consistently in the Hebrew and the Greek, we get the singular. There's no plural. There's no our faces, my faces, just like there is for the living creature who is echad. So there's no question this could have been done if that is the nature of God. But it's not, as we're seeing. Deuteronomy 5:7, you must never have any other gods against my face. Singular Trinitarians, one person. And person is being used in contrast to gods who are not him, because he's God to the people. So again, person is never used of anything other than the individual as the thing that is spoken about, whether it's God or gods. The only multiplicity in an actual numerical plural we have is where we started, right here. And used of an echad, but not of God. Like right here, Deuteronomy 6:4, listen, O Israel, Jehovah our God is one Jehovah, echad. But this echad has one pene, one prosopon. Not more than one. He could have. That's been clearly communicated for an echad already. He's just not, Trinitarians. He's just not. 2 Samuel 21:1, now there came to be a famine in the days of David for 3 years. Year after year, and David proceeded to consult the face of Jehovah. Then Jehovah said upon Saul and upon his house, there is blood guilt because he has put the Gibeonites to death. Again, this is how they understood God. 2 Chronicles 19:2, Jehu the son of Hanani, the visionary, now went out before him and said to King Jehoshaphat, is it to the wicked that help is to be given? And is it for those hating Jehovah that you should have love? And for this there is indignation against you from the person of Jehovah, not persons. Could have easily been done. Job 1:12. Accordingly, Jehovah said to Satan, look, everything that he has is in your hand. Only against him himself do not thrust out your hand. So Satan went away from the person of Jehovah. In the Hebrew, it's pene. In the Greek, it uses para. He went out away from being with the Lord or Jehovah. So it still communicates the same thing, but not with prosopon. But as you're going to see, prosopon comes up in basically the same type of verse used next. But again, pene is singular. Job 2:5, for a change, thrust out your hand, please. This is Satan talking to God. And touch as far as his bone and his flesh, and see whether he will not curse you to your very face. Pene is used, just like in Job 1:12. I may have said 1:2 there. I apologize if I did. It's 1:12. And here in 2:5, you not only get pene, but also prosopon. Showing that, again, para, it's just another way of basically expressing the fact that he went out away from being with the person, the being of God. Kind of like in John 1:1, when it uses pros, prepositional relationship, showing the two are distinct. And it even does so in terms of theos, right? Doesn't use person there. But it does here in the singular for God in both the Hebrew and the Greek in Job 2:5. Verse 7, so Satan went out away from the person of Jehovah. And here again you get pene, but again you get a prepositional expression with apa, apo, from, away from. But they're all panei in the Hebrew, and prosopon is basically used in the same way as para and apo. Okay, Psalm 95:2, let us come before his person. Let us with melody shout out in triumph to him, for Jehovah is a great God and a great King over all gods. Now notice NWT uses other there because he's God, right? He's the obvious exception to the all-inclusive statement in the Hebrew, all gods. That's how the NWT uses other all over the place. But as we know, Trinitarians go berserk when they see this exact same bracketed term in Colossians 1:16 through 17. All while ultimately admitting there are multiple exceptions to the use of other, the very next verse in verse 18, and even in many cases, verse 20, unless you're Sam Shimon, who apparently believes that all things in Colossians 1:20, because he doesn't understand that there are exceptions to tapanta all over the place in almost every, if not every, use of the term. There is some exception, and even many at times. Because Sam doesn't understand that, it blinds him to Colossians 1:18 and Colossians 1:20, where he apparently thinks that tapanta, because they're so locked into what it means, or they think it means in verses 15 and 16 of Colossians 1:16 and 17, right after calling Jesus the firstborn, beginning of God's generative power, Deuteronomy 21:17, they totally collapse and fail to understand the use of tapanta in 16 and 17 and 18. Well, they're not consistent in 18. And then they have a division now with verse 20 because of how they're seeing it in verses 16 and 17. That's all inclusive with no exceptions, right? Even the one again is explicitly stated. And I've shown so many examples where this is the case, not just verse 18 in that very same chapter, but numerous other places. I did so yesterday. I've done so in part 17 of this series. This is very common. It's incredible that Trinitarians just collapse over this issue. I will be doing a separate video about Dr. White's commentary on Sam Shamoun's apparent belief in the reconciliation of Satan. All because of his failure to understand tapanta in verse 20. But fortunately, we have translations like NWT that try to make it more clear. That maybe not always be necessary to use other, in my opinion, but as long as you understand what it's doing, and it's not just doing it in Colossians 1:15 and 16 and 17, Trinitarians act like that's the only time it happens, right? And so they go crazy. It's like, oh, they're trying to lie about Jesus and he's the creator there. Well, no, he's not the creator there. We've already shown that. And he is the firstborn, meaning he is created there in a unique way, like the only begotten God, and so different as well. But you guys don't understand tapanta's usage in the Bible. So it just drives you into all kinds of problematic equations, and even leading people like Sam to think that Satan will be reconciled, even though the Bible explicitly refers to him being chained up and then ultimately destroyed. We'll talk about that another time. I think that's a cry for help, as I said in the pre-show. But either way, that's what the other is used for here, even though it says all, right? So, and of course, before his person, singular, Psalm 143:7, oh, hurry, answer me, O Jehovah. My spirit has come to an end. Do not conceal your face. Not faces, Trinitarians. Or I must become comparable with those going down into the pit. Jeremiah 44:11. Therefore, this is what Jehovah of armies, the God of Israel, Echad, Hear, O Israel, Deuteronomy 6:4. This is what that God has said, Trinitarians. Here I am setting my face against you for calamity and for cutting off of all Judah. Once again, Trinitarians, even though we have Echad here, we're only getting one face. But we already know that there can be an echad with more than one face. Even more than one person, right? A man and a cherubim in one echad. How come we're not getting that with God? Because that's what you say God is. And that's not what we're reading. Lamentations 4:16, the face of Jehovah, singular. Trinitarians believe God is one God, echad, and a plurality of persons. That's not showing up here, though. He will not look upon them again. Men will certainly show no consideration even for the priests, no favor even to the old men. Jehovah has one face, Trinitarians, not many. He could have. He's echad. The living creature's echad. Living creature has more than one face, more than one person, and one echad. But not God. Not Jehovah. Daniel 9:17. And now listen, O our God, to the prayer of your servant and to his entreaties, and cause your face to shine upon your sanctuary that is desolated for the sake of Jehovah. Hosea 7:10. And the pride of Israel has testified to his face. They have not returned to Jehovah, their God, nor have they looked for him because of all of this. Same thing, Jehovah has one face, his face, not faces or their faces. Like we saw with the cherubim or the living creature in Ezekiel, which had a face of a cherub and a man and a lion and an eagle. So you can definitely have more than one face or person in one echad if that's what is taught in the Bible. We're not seeing it so far with God. Nahum 1:5, mountains themselves have rocked because of him. Very hills found themselves melting. The earth will be upheaved because of his face, Trinitarians. The productive land also and all those dwelling in it. Zechariah 8:21, the inhabitants of one city will certainly go to those of another, saying, let us earnestly go to soften the face of Jehovah and to seek Jehovah of armies. I myself also will go also. And many peoples and mighty nations will actually come and seek Jehovah of armies in Jerusalem to soften the face of Jehovah. Let's just take a look at that. Zechariah 8:22, the Bible Hub. We'll take a look at the Hebrew first. If we had it here. And here you can see it says Paneh. And then in verse 22, Paneh again. Take a look at the Greek. I see. It's Dada. Dada scratching over there. You can see right here in the Greek, here is prosopu, the singular term for prosopon, genitive case in verse 21. And then you get prosopon right here in verse 22. Prosopon kyriou pantakrataros. Pantakrataros. The person. Ta prosopon kyriou pantakrataros. The person, the face, singular. Paneh, Trinitarians, of the Lord the Almighty. And then you get it again here, prosopon kyriou, face of the Lord, singular, just like in the Hebrew. Malachi 1:9. And now please soften the face of God, that he may show us favor. God has one face, Trinitarians, one person, one Panay, one prosopon. He could have had more. Cherub had more. Echad. But God only has one Panay, one prosopon. So why can't you just accept that and admit that that could have been expressed exactly, pretty much the way you believe? But it isn't. 1 Peter 3:12, for the eyes of Jehovah. We understand it's NWT here. It says Lord or God, but NWT sometimes uses Jehovah in the New Testament where I don't really believe it should be. So, with that said, the eyes of the Lord or Jehovah are upon the righteous ones, and his ears are toward their supplication. But the face of Jehovah is against those doing bad things. So there's a quote mark here, so it might be a quotation in the NWT. I didn't copy the full context. So if it is a quote, that'd be different. The face, though, Trinitarians. Same thing. 1 Peter 3:12. 1 Peter 3:12. You can see right here, prosopon de Kyriou, but face or person of the Lord. There's really no controversy about what Panay or prosopon means, or even whether or not it could have been used of one echad. It's just not for God. Galatians 3:20, right? The text that started this whole series 24 videos ago, if you include that one. Or don't include that one, right? It'd be 25 with all of them. To date, we have a lot more. Let's just take a look. There's no mediator where only one person is concerned, but God is only one. Let's look at Galatians 3:20 in the Bible Hub. We're almost done, everyone. I think it's pretty clear, don't you? We haven't even read texts like 1 Corinthians 8:6 that identify the one God explicitly as the Father. We're just looking at the terms for face and person. There are numerous other examples I'd be here all night. I just picked the ones I thought would highlight this very clear and consistent teaching the most. There's like tens or even hundreds more that show the same thing. And so again, other than plurals of majesty or non-numerical plurals, which are proven by the corresponding translation in Greek and even the modern translations, which know that too. And I have a whole series going on about the plurals in Hebrew. So just take a look at those videos if you have any questions about those plural forms. That's a special category of Hebrew plurals that is not numerical. The Trinitarians just lie and aren't even consistent about it being that, like with Elohim. If it's an actual plural, it means gods, not multiple persons in one God, right? They literally want us to have a plural understanding of God, but not have a plurality of gods, right? They want a plurality of a whole different term, panay. They want Elohim to be panim for one L, right? One, if we're going to take it in the singular. But that's just, again, their ridiculousness. Elohim is frequently used in that majestic sense, translated by singular in the Septuagint all the time. And if it were a plural numerically, not majestically, it would mean gods contradicting the Trinity. So this is, it gets to a point where the Trinitarians are just so deep in their tradition. You will constantly be repeating yourself, as we're finding out now, with the Collapsagon, right? The monument to false doctrine and heresies, in particular as promoted by Sam Shimon, right? The ultimate heretic, right? The modern day Athanasius in terms of his insanity and spiritual retardedness, right? And he's a special case. We've documented that. He's now thinking he can reconcile Satan to God because he doesn't understand Tapanta in Colossians 1:15 and 17. So he totally collapses in verse 18 and verse 20. And I think there's another motive here. I think Sam has crossed over. I think we've shown that, in my opinion. So he's sort of just, it seems, reaching out to his side there in Colossians 1:20, maybe looking out for the devil, given his condition. But Sam, I'd encourage you to stop that and to submit yourself back to, start with your Trinitarians. They'll be the best place for you right now, probably, so they can try to manage you, although they unleashed you and created you, so maybe not, right? I don't know. You're on your own, Sam. We've done everything we can. Galatians 3:20. We just read it in WT. I've done a whole video on it, the first video of this series. Hade mesites henas uk estin. Hade theos heis estin. Right? But the mediator it says, but the mediator is not one, right? Let's go back. But the mediator one not is. But God one is. So if we compare that with their multiple translations to see how the Trinitarian Bibles render it. Galatians 3:20. It says, so if we look at NIV, a mediator implies more than one party. So when it says a mediator not one is, it's saying if there's a mediator, then there has to be more than one. A mediator requires more than one person. A mediator not one is. But God is one. Go back to the Greek. It's actually right across here. Ha de, but the mediator, ha de mesites, henas uk estin, not one is. Ha de theos, but the God is one. So look at the way the NIV renders that. It's basically the same. When it says the mediator not one is, NIV says that a mediator implies more than one person, more than one party. Why wouldn't God imply that, Trinitarians? It not only explicitly says, right after saying a mediator is not one, because it requires another person to be there. Well, first of all, again, why wouldn't it say that about God? Why wouldn't it say, ha theos henos uk estin, right here? But the God one not is. Meaning, like NIV's translation, God implies more than one person. I know God is one according to Deuteronomy 6:4. I quoted it. That's my whole point. He's one person. That's exactly what it says in the second part of this verse. The God is one in direct contrast to a mediator not being one. There has to be another person there. And this other person who he's talking about, the mediator, is Jesus. So if God is multi-personal and a mediator requires more than one person, how is it that God is used as one here in contrast to the mediator? Because the God and the mediator here are two of your persons. How is it possible that God couldn't imply the same thing that mediator implies if he's multi-personal? And in fact, his multi-personality includes both of these individuals, the Father and Son, in terms of the mediation that's being discussed. A mediator, one not is. A mediator implies more than one party. NIV. But God is one. God does not imply more than one party, therefore. That's the contrast. It's what I explained to you all in the first episode, the Trinitarians, right? But they went crazy. Do you understand it now? Is this a little easier for you, Trinitarians? A mediator implies more than one person because you can't mediate without another person. God does not imply more than one person, which is explicitly stated by the contrast. It's just translated differently by NIV because they don't want to contradict the Trinity. Right? It should be a mediator implies more than one party, but God does not imply more than one party. If they want to be consistent, right? Because the first part is henos uk estin. One not is. A mediator isn't one. It's got to be someone else there. But God is one. Doesn't have to be anyone else there. Just him. And it's talking about him in contrast to the mediator, who is, in your view, Trinitarians, another person of this same God. So it would have to imply more than one party, if your view is correct. It's over. I told everybody this in the first episode of this series. Maybe that's why they kept interrupting me all the time, right? Especially in part 2, but even in part 1. It's so obvious right here, everybody. The game, it's over. It's been over for so long. I mean, in 1 Corinthians 8:6, right, all the texts we've talked about, but that's why I started this series with this text. It's so incredibly powerful and destroys the Trinity as a biblical concept. A mediator implies more than one party, but God does not. And the God who does not imply more than one party is distinct from the mediator here, which according to Galatians 1 is not a man. I know 1 Timothy 2:5 says one mediator between God and man, a man, Jesus. The immediate surrounding context refers to him giving his life as a man. That's why. Galatians 1 multiple times explicitly states Paul received his appointment in Revelation not from a man, but from Jesus. Not from something human, but from Jesus. So, that is incorrect. And I did a whole video on 1 Timothy 2:5 and on Galatians 3:20. This couldn't be more against the idea that God is multi-personal. It is explicit in making clear that God is not multi-personal. Otherwise, he could be. He could be the mediator and a party. He could be the God and the mediator. But according to this, he can't. That's the whole point of contrasting him with the mediator. The mediator, there has to be someone else. With God, there doesn't. So he's one, in contrast to the mediator, meaning he's one person in that mediation arrangement. If he was more than one person, there'd be no point in making a contrast with the mediator that implies more than one person. Because God would then imply more than one person, and what's the contrast therefore? So the mediator implies more than one party, and God implies more than one party. Well, then what are you saying? You're not saying anything, right? You're just saying they're the same. They both imply more than one party. That's not what he's saying, though, is it? He's saying one implies more than one party and the other one does not, and is contrasted directly with another member of the alleged so-called Trinity. So it's doubly against the Trinity by separating the mediator from God, who is one person. Whereas if Jesus was also a person of God, there'd be no need for that separation, and the mediation could imply more than one person as part of the Godhead, at least for two parts of it. All right. So that's very clear. No, Jordan, that's incorrect. The Logos was not always with God. The Logos was with God in the beginning. So you don't have a text that says the Logos was always with God, do you? That's why you don't quote it. It's good to see you too, but please don't promote false doctrine. Just quote the Bible, okay? The Logos was in the beginning with God. He wasn't that God, and he's not eternal. He was in the beginning with God as the only begotten God, one of the sons of God, the firstborn, beginning of God's generative power, the beginning of the creation by God. So let's just don't go any further with false doctrine, please, or we'll have to remove you. Yes, everything came through the Logos after he was created as God's firstborn. The Bible uses all-inclusive language all over the place, as we've talked about earlier, talked about yesterday, and the show before, and in part 17. But if you're not going to listen, and if you're not going to pay attention, there's nothing we can do for you. So go back and listen to my Comments Review number 5 show. Go back and watch part 17 in this series, or the upcoming clip of that part about all things, and try to align yourselves with the Bible. Yes, so Aaron Martins had asked me if I can comment on what I said previously about Trinitarians making a fourth person via understanding God's being a substance. Yes, well, that's what they do. I talk about it a lot in my Understanding Trinitarianism chapter, second and third editions of Jehovah's Witnesses Defended. So what ends up happening, Aaron, is they personalize, like what we've been reading, these texts where God is talking as one person, my face before my person. Well, that's so if that's Jehovah, if that's God, there's only one God in Trinitarianism, the Trinity. But they call each of the persons God, confusing people. They don't believe they're separate gods. So who's talking, right? When God is talking as God, as the one God, I and me and there's no one else type stuff, well, who is that? Is that the Father? So the Father is the only God and no one else? Well, we know that in the sense in which it's contextually discussed in Isaiah and then, of course, 1 Corinthians 8:6, but the Trinitarians can't explain that. If the one God is the Trinity, then who's talking? For example, in Isaiah 44:24. Who's the I am God there? And there's no one else. The Trinity as such doesn't talk, right? As a fourth person. But they basically present it and quote these texts as if it is. There's one God, the Trinity. But the Trinity doesn't talk as a Trinity, as all three at one time, right? Type thing, I guess. Because they're each individual persons. And the Trinitarians believe they talk to each other. So they're not all saying the same thing at the same time when they speak that way using singular or first-person pronouns, which makes it seem like they're personalizing the Trinity because it's God that's talking and there's only one God to them, and the one God is the Trinity. But that's because they then substitute the Trinity for one of the persons of God. So what they'll do is they'll say there's one God, the Trinity, but then they'll call each of the persons of the Trinity God. Not meaning Trinity, meaning a person of the Trinity. So they're using God in two different ways at a minimum. For the Trinity, they're one God. And then for the persons, each of the persons, none of whom are a Trinity individually. So they mean divine essence, what they share in. That's not how the Bible uses that, though. It doesn't use God for a Trinity, as we're seeing right now. And it doesn't use God for a plurality of persons, as we're seeing right now. It doesn't use God for a person of God, I mean to say. Like a non-separate being, like we were talking about earlier with the multiple faces in one being and the three-headed individual as an analogy. So you're hearing the word God that's in the Bible, but they're telling you, they're saying that's God the Father talking there. So they're reading the Trinity into every single use of God, either to understand it as the Trinity. Jehovah our God is one, echad. They maybe see that as like a Trinity, one God. But then they're also doing it for a non-God, non-individual person of God. It's all Trinitarianism assumed under the use of a biblical term. And unless you explain it, unless they explain it like I am, you'll just hear God. And so they'll be telling you a text that for them would be the Trinity talking, maybe, or at least it seems like it. It's hard to get them to commit on some texts. But they'll ultimately just pick one of the persons if it's someone talking. I'll just say it's one of the persons. Well, but it says God there, right? There's only one God, and it's the Trinity. So is the Trinity talking? No, it's the person of the Father. It says God, though, right? It goes back to the whole John 1:1 thing, Aaron. They're substituting the term. So unless you stop them, right? Like I said, if I got into a debate, or the second they use the word God, I need to know, is that the Trinity? No, that's the Father. Oh, so you mean a person of the Trinity, not an individual God? Yes. Okay, well, that's not what it says. It just says God there. And it doesn't present a multiple personality God, multiple person God. That's what we're proving right now. So they're assuming all that. So it comes across at times as if the Trinity is somewhat of a fourth person that talks, because it's not defined in any other way than God. And they say God is a Trinity. That's their only one God. And yet, because they use God for three different persons, but they mean something different than an individual God, they get away with it until you call them on it. Because it's not what you mean. It's not what the Bible means. And so you really have to understand the meaning that they're putting into these terms and compare it with the Bible. It's your only hope, right? You got to hold them to what they're saying and then use the text and what they're saying. And then, like you're seeing right here in Galatians 3:20, right? It couldn't be more obvious that God is one person. He's directly contrasted with another person they claim is. He entered heaven itself now to appear for us in God's presence. Now, it doesn't use parousia here. It uses prosopon right there. To prosopo to theou. singular Trinitarians. And I think the NIV presence, you can get that meaning from posupon, but that's because you're before the person. If you're before the person, you're in their presence. I think this contradicts their doctrine. They didn't want to go with person right there, right? Entered into heaven to appear before the person of God. God's only one person, right? That's what it says. It literally says that. The person of God. Not persons, Trinitarians. New American Standard, to appear in the presence of God for us. King James, appear in the presence of God. Net Bible now appears in God's presence for us. I think they're scared to translate that the way it's supposed to be. Like the American Standard, appear before the face of God. The person, Trinitarians. Prosopon, pane, always means a person, unless it's in the plural, in which case even an akkad, like in Ezekiel 10, can have more than one pane, but not God. In fact, Galatians 3:20 shows that that's not who God is at all. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a problem. He could be the mediator, because the mediator implies more than one person. But God does not. So it can't be the case that God is more than one person. Otherwise, that wouldn't be said, and that contrast wouldn't have been made. I'm sorry, Trinitarians. Your doctrine, your metaphysic is not taught in these texts. So let's take a look at one last text, Matthew 18:10. We'll look at it first in the NWT. We'll wrap this up. Thank you for joining me. Matthew 18:10. I think it's very clear, everybody, there's only one person that is God, other than those who represent him, the angels, the sons of God. But Jesus, Satan, everybody appears before the person of God, the face of God, not faces, not persons. But that could have definitely been described, as we saw with the use of panim and echad in Ezekiel. But it's not even in Ezekiel or in Deuteronomy 6:4. Matthew 18:10, our last text, everybody. Thank you for joining me for the Bible and the Trinity in Conflict, part 25. God is one person. That has been established conclusively. There is no text that describes in a numerical sense a multi-personal God in the Bible. It's just read back into the Bible, like the Trinitarian understanding of God itself, as I described a moment ago for a commentator named Aaron. They're reading their doctrine back into every single use of God. They have to. They can't have it mean an individual God, unless it's the Trinity or a false God. They can't have the sons of God, individual spirits, as gods, no matter what God and Jesus say. They can't have Jesus as an individual God or the Father. They're persons that are not individual beings that share one nature, not separate. That's just not what the Bible teaches. That's what they see in everything, though. When they see the word God, they either see Trinity or person of God. Sometimes Godhead or the divine nature of the Trinity. But it's always the Trinity being read into God. That will never not be the case unless they stop believing the Trinity. That's why it's so frustrating, right? They're saying the word God. And if you don't stop them every time, right, they won't even get past the first text, because what would be the point of letting them go on to the next one? They didn't establish that God means a Trinity or a person of the Trinity. That's what they're reading into it. So how many times are you going to let that happen? Wouldn't let it happen more than once. Not unless I'm just teaching people or we're going over all this, we're adding to the monument of heresy, right? But I wouldn't waste a lot of time with people. Matthew 18:10, see to it that you men do not despise one of these little ones, children. For I tell you that their angels in heaven always behold the face of my Father who is in heaven. Matthew 18:10, let's just double check it in the Bible Hub. Right, face, singular. And of course, that's the Father. Trinitarians would say, yeah, face of the Father, person of the Father. Right. Well, we're not getting that with other persons, though. In the Bible, the one God is the Father. 1 Corinthians 8:6. It's the earliest Christian creed or doctrine we have, pretty much. Unless you want to take something from Jesus. So God is directly limited to the Father. The Father in Matthew 18:10 is one person. Prosopon, tu patros mu. Ta prosopon, tu patros mu. The one God of the Bible, Trinitarians, 1 Corinthians 8:6, whole video on it. The one Jehovah, one Echad, is the Father. It explicitly tells us that. And it never once uses a plurality for person or face in a numerical sense or meaning. For God, for Jehovah, Jahovah, Jaho, Jah, in either Hebrew or Greek. So there's absolutely nothing in the Bible that gives us any foundation or basis for concluding anything other than the God of the Bible is one person, not three.